So, Brad, I got big news for you this week, my friend. I went all the way to Alaska, America's, 49th states? 49th state. Beautiful, the beautiful northern climes of Alaska. Brad, I traveled, it took 2 jets, multiple airports, right? Got all the way up there. Well, arguably one of America's most outdoorsy states. You know what I mean? Like you're in the woods. It's me and moose and bears and Brad, I got COVID. Darn it.
You came back from COVID and all you got was this lousy COVID? Now, wait a minute. If I remember right, you haven't gotten COVID at all throughout this entire pandemic. Is that right?
I made it 3 years and 2 months, Brad.
Oh my
Since that first weird wolf dog thing in Wuhan brought it into the market, but it finally brought me down. I had to go all the way to Alaska to catch it, though. That's what made me laugh. Is that literally about as far as I could travel to the most outdoorsy place ever, and that's where I got it.
You really put in the extra work to get this COVID. Yeah. Well, the good news is you got it, you kicked it. It was what an afternoon, right?
Well, I'm on day 4 of 14 of testing very positive, Brad. Very positive on day 14. My body is proving to be able to fight this off like a 108-year-old man. I'm doing great.
You sent me the lined up tests, and not only were your lines red, they were dark, vibrant red. Like I've never seen neon red in a COVID test before.
Yeah, I think at this point my COVID has now caught COVID. Like it's the virus is now it's now looped on itself. So anyway, it's been I gotta say though the trip up to Alaska was so worth it. I remain of the highest opinion of the comics camp that Alaska Robotics puts on up there. It's about 65 people from Canada, from the United States, from Puerto Rico. I don't think there was anyone from Mexico this year. But gosh, it was a dang delight. And I made new friends that I'm going to want to invite onto the podcast, Brad, that you are going to love. And COVID aside, if there's a way that I can convince you for next year to go, I hope you'll join me, because it remains one of the best things going in the cartooning world. The Alaska Robotics Comics Camp once a year in spring.
Oh man, it does sound like a lot of fun. I definitely, because just the idea of going and talking shop for that amount of time, just with a lot of other creators and stuff, sounds like a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, and there's, we've talked about this before, but we do little mini panels throughout the weekend. So it's like, hey, if anyone wants to talk about humor writing, which we did, we're going to be having a mini panel where Dave Malky, Ryan North, Dave Kellett, Jillian Gerst are going to talk about writing for comedy over on this part of the camp.
It's like a murderer's row of really good writers you just mentioned.
It was great because we were like, everybody grab a coffee or a beer or whatever you want, come over here, and you're trying to give a panel talk, and then there's literally a 30-pound Alaskan raven trying to steal your coffee while those things are gigantic. They're so much bigger than crows. A raven is gigantic. And they were actively trying to steal whatever little tinfoil I had around me. I was like, oh, Brad would love this.
No kidding.
But then there were things about structuring your business. We did talks about how to hire or be hired. It was really great. And then there was just runners of humor, Brad. Just entire 3 days of jokes. I had a whole joke, and I'm going to share this with you just before we get into the show. I don't know how, but Ryan North and I started joking about how, because he's Canadian, and I was like, you always have to write these things like, oh, the Fantastic Four has saved New York, or oh, Daredevil saved Chicago, or whatever it is. And I said, no one ever goes to Quebec, and I want to see a little Quebecois kid that, like, the Fantastic Four comes in and they save Quebec, and the little Quebecois kid is like, bienvenue à Quebec, bonjour les fantastiques! And it's just like this little kid in Quebecois French, just like saying hi to Mr. Fantastic and the Fantastic Four. Bienvenue à Quebec, Batman! And God bless it, it's the dumbest joke, and we had a runner on it for 3 days solid. And that's the kind of thing that I love about Comics Camp. It's just people in the weeds about comics that love being around the world, and I can't recommend it enough. I cannot recommend it enough, Brad.
Getting in the weeds up in the woods.
And so on that note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to Comic Lab, the show about making comics.
And making a living from comics, I'm Brad Geiger, the author of the Webcomics Handbook and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his pal Dave Kellett, the cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and the co-director of Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. We got a big show for everybody, and the topics today are going to bang, be exciting because Brad and I were just talking about them before the show, and I'm excited to jump into them. And so this first question is going to be the one that's going to frame our entire show for today, and it goes like this. All right, so this comes in over at patreon.com/comiclab and says, "Hey guys, Tom here. So now I've got my own website for my comics, but what do I do with it? I've got an audience on other platforms, and everyone who followed my work conveniently gets my public releases on those platforms.
Right.
So why do they go to my site? People only find it by being directed to it by my already active social media presence. And if they're already there, I've already got them. So I love having it, but I don't know how to make it useful."
Yeah.
So I turn this question to the king of websites and making them useful. Brad Geiger, how would you answer Tom's question?
This is a great question because for the last several months, we've been harping on this idea of owning and controlling your own work, and that a website is a big part of that, You've got to build your castle on your own ground. And if you're building it on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or any of the others, then you really don't own that property. And as we've seen so many times in the past, something can happen, upset the apple cart, and everything that you've worked for is gone.
Or an apple cart, too.
What? Man, I thought I slid that past you. So good to have you back, Dave.
Brad just slides across the table a ticket for Alaska Airlines. There you go, champ. Back you go. Back you go.
So, you can get into trouble. And we've been talking a lot about our friends from DreamHost setting up that special introductory offer for Comic Lab listeners. And we've actually heard back from a lot of Comic Lab listeners who are saying, yeah, we've tried that. We like it. But we hear this from a lot of people. Now I got it. What do I do with it? Okay, so let's talk about that, because it seems like second nature to you and me, Dave. We've been doing this on the web, using websites since 2000. But just think, if you're somebody that came up in social media architecture, this is not intuitive. So let's talk about everything that you can do and you should be doing with your website. The first one is the obvious one. It's a standing archive of your work. So once people get interested in it, they can go back and read back issues and back older comics and archives of previous work. That's the first one. Number two, it's a way for you to direct traffic and do a certain amount of business. In other words, you should have. I do not recommend anybody actually put ads on their website anymore. Nope. However, I do recommend using that space that was traditionally used for ads to do house ads. That's ads for your stuff. So if you go to my site, you're going to see a lot of here's what we're doing on Patreon. Here's the ebooks you can buy. If I'm doing a Kickstarter, there's going to be a lot of notification about that. So I'm doing that as well. But it even goes further. You should have I'm a big proponent of rethinking the traditional webcomics website as a landing page, not just showing the most recent comic, but also having prominent places where you can say, here's where you can buy the ebooks. Here's where you can get original art. Here's where you can get involved in this. Here's how you can get involved in our Discord. All of these other things. It's a place for you to direct traffic, okay? And that's just still scratching the surface. It should also be a place for indoctrination of newer audience members. In other words, you should have an about page that talks about, gives you a newcomer something that they can read quickly to find out who the main characters are and what the basic story is. You should have places where you can jump into important places in your storyline if you're doing a story-based comic, or special groups of comics. If you're doing something that's more humor-based, more standalone, you can group those by topic and have an import there. Having a trailer, like a video trailer of your story. In other words, this is a place for you to do all of the things that you want to do in terms of your comic. And of course, you are going to share that on social media too. But here's what you're missing. On social media, it's here and then it's gone. It's here and then it's gone. It flickers. Yes. It flickers. Here, gone. Here, bink, bink, bonk, bonk, like twinkling stars, right? And if you don't happen to look and catch a twinkle, you don't know that it's there.
Right.
On your website, it's always there. And so sometimes when you're doing social media outreach, you're saying, by the way, if you'd like to get a quick update, if you'd like to know what's going on in the storyline, go here. And then you direct them over to where you've got your about page, right? If you'd like to find out about ebooks, here's some more information on that. It's a place you can direct. It's basically a hub of all of your activities. And so as you're continuing to build audience on social media, you're using your website to cement that audience because they haven't gotten, again, they're only seeing twinkles. And so you're every chance you get, you're bringing them back to the website, and that website is a hub of activities. It's more than just the most recent comic. It's a whole bunch of stuff around that so that you can take that person who's maybe a little bit interested and turn them into a fan.
Absolutely. And to build on that, it's a hub of everything that you have, and it's presented in the best way possible that you know how to present your work.
Yeah.
So no other social media site is telling you what single thing you can pin to your tweets or what stories you should highlight on your Instagram sub-reel, that kind of thing. This is where you get to say, this is my best work. This is the best way to read it. This is how I choose to present it. You know how your work deserves to look, right? Yeah. Do you remember, Brad, for example, this is just a for example, remember when Facebook started about 8 years ago, sort of down-resing some images that you would upload? Do you remember when they did that? Some social media sites still do that. Yeah. And it drove me bonkers because it was like, no, I saved this at a specific way, the specific way I wanted to present. And Facebook would down-res it. And the same thing, you could think of any other way that Twitter limits how you can show who you are and what your best work is, how Instagram limits who you are and what your best work is, because ultimately they are serving those platforms. You are serving you. Yeah. The goal of Twitter is to keep people on Twitter and eyeballs activated on Twitter and ad sales for Twitter. Same as with Instagram, same with Facebook, same with anything else. Your website, the goal is to, as Brad said, indoctrinate, if one would look at it, but also to evangelize, to get people to come in and fall in love with you, with your work in the best way that you know how, to the greatest depth that you can give them with your archives. And for that reason, you definitely want your website.
Yeah. And in that way, I gave you a whole list of stuff. That's just the jumping off point. Now you get to use your creativity to add to that list for things that apply just to your comic or just to your audience. This is where you get creative, right? And then it's always there. It's always there for you to point people to. If you've got one of those Linktree setups, your link tree is probably going to link to 2 or 3 places on your website that you can direct traffic to and so forth. Now, just beyond that, in general, make sure that your website is mobile responsive. That means that it looks right. It is very easy to navigate on a mobile device because, again, probably 80 or 90% of your audience is on a mobile device. So I'm sure it's great that it looks good on desktop. You need to set up a site. I recommend WordPress, and I recommend Toocheke, which is a content management system, Toocheke. It's mobile responsive. It's set up for websites that do web comics, and it's your best bet. You want to make sure that you're set up for that because you don't want to go all this way and come up with a website that looks great on desktop and not so hot on a mobile device.
And once you do, the next thing I would suggest, and I'm going to steal thunder from my friend here who gave me this advice, is you're going to want to start incorporating the Patreon API into your website. Yes. And what does that do? Well, as Brad says, your website is there with the archives presented the best way they know how to indoctrinate and evangelize people and make it easy to fall in love with you and your work, right? Yeah. And then once they do, that website is ready set with the Patreon API to say, like, listen, back me for $2, $3, $5 a month, and you can unlock X, Y, and Z, whether that's more archives, whether that's specific ways of bundling the archives, whether that's exclusives or sneak peeks or behind the scenes, whatever your Patreon is going to give them, that API can unlock stuff on the website that previously was not possible 2, 3, 4 years ago.
Right.
Now it's an amazing asset, and I have taken this entirely from my friend Brad, who gave me this advice with Drive, and it has proved incredibly effective as a way of helping people go from fans to super fans and super fans to people that dive into parts of the website that are unlocked with their Patreon. It's so powerful. I can't recommend it enough.
Yeah, that Patreon API is a very important. I'm glad you brought that up because it completely slipped my mind. Really important part of that whole thing because Patreon isn't great when it comes to presenting comics. It was not originally set up for comics
and archives. Yeah, exactly.
They do their best. They're in there trying, but it's not. It's not great for as much as I love them, and I stand second to nobody in my love for Patreon, but it's not great for comics. Here's your chance to say, okay, here's how my work really should be best presented. And then you set that up. Again, This is not a replacement for social media. It's not a replacement for these other things you're doing, but it's going to be the main hub that all of those things circle around. So you're going to continue to put your comic out on Twitter, for example, right? So that it can be read on Twitter, not a link back to your website. It's okay. It's okay that both things happen. I can read that comic completely, today's comic on Twitter. All right. And then if I do that enough, I'm going to follow you on Twitter and I'm going to get more of your messages. One of those messages might be, hey, here's a place on the website that you can go to see the entire library of e-comics that I have on offer. OK, boom. That's one way that you're using it as a hub. Right. You can also, if somebody does go back to that website, you direct them to the website for another reason. They do it and they see a Patreon promotion that you're doing. Now they're funneling that into Patreon where you're actually going to get paid. Boom. You're using it as a hub. Everything revolves around your website, which is then funneled into the things that make you money, like e-comics and Patreon.
Now, you've heard two guys telling you all the positives about having a website. Let me argue from the negative about why it's important to have a website. Okay, so you heard Brad in passing talk about this is something that you own and control, right? And I want to tell you from two people who have lived through LiveJournal and MySpace and Tumblr, and now currently what's happening with Twitter, that as wonderful and as flash in the pan, as exciting, as much sizzle as social media can have, and when it's really working, social media does have that crackle. It's it's fun. People are talking, they're moving, things are being shared, right? And you feel it. You see your things being liked and retweeted and re-journaled and whatever it's going to be. So you see it happening in real time. But here's the thing, you don't own and control it. So here's the argument from the negative about why you need a website. Within the next couple months, it is not entirely impossible that Twitter could be banned in the EU or barring that in France.
Yes.
It's not impossible.
Yes.
I mean, he has borked this so badly that we could lose, I don't know, a fourth of our Twitter audience overnight. Brad and I could. And we've spent the better part of a decade building up what has arguably been a workable, usable, friendly, helpful social media for our career. But we don't own and control that platform, right? And so we are currently beholden to a man-child making stupid decisions. And the same thing has happened with Tumblr or with LiveJournal or with MySpace. So yes, you can build incredible things on social media. Brad and I hear you. We do it ourselves, right? We use it to the best we can. But in some respects, it's like building on sand. Is that it can all just be swept away very quick. Surprisingly quickly, it can be swept away. And when it happens, you're like, where'd Tumblr go? Hey, what happened to MySpace? How do And so, yes, it is more exciting, more sexy to be on social media, but you need that foundational website. Just trust us. You got to have that there.
Because then when that happens, then one of your readers realizes maybe months later that they haven't been seeing stuff from you, or maybe like in Dave's case, it just goes, the entire platform goes up. Then that reader who really did enjoy you, and you were walking them towards becoming a fan. You were walking them towards becoming a Patreon backer. They weren't there yet, but they were getting close. They're on that precipice. And they go, oh, yeah, remember I was reading Drive online, and I realized I haven't seen it yet. I wonder whatever happened to Drive. Then the next thing they do a quick search. Drive comes up.
Oh my God.
Points them right to the website, and boom, you're back in touch. Because why? Because that even though Twitter was built on sand, even though your live journal was built on sand, your website stayed concrete, and it's there for what all those other things go up. Your website's still there.
I'm only going to give this example because it's so flippin' perfect to what you just said. I got an email this week, Brad. Yeah. Someone had Googled something about 2001: A Space Odyssey, right? Okay. And they rediscovered a comic that came up on a Google image search that I did 10 years ago. So it's crawled on my website. It's sitting in my archives. They found the comic. They remembered that they used to love Sheldon, right? They apparently spent the next Saturday just reading a bunch of Sheldon. Yeah. They bought 4 books from my website that day, by the end of that day. Yeah. This is a real world example of how my website, because the archives were there, because it was crawlable and searchable by SEO, and then they rediscovered me again after 10 years, because things happen. You move college, you change computers, you lose track of what you used to read online. They found me again 10 years later. They dove into my archives over the course of that Saturday. Then they bought 4 books. Right. That is a real world example of having that foundational website made a huge difference that day.
So let's wrap up this conversation just by saying this. We gave you a whole laundry list of things. We told you also to apply your own creativity for those things that will apply strictly to your comic, things that are special for you, is brainstorms that you had. This is a chance for you to get experimental. This is a chance for you to get a little bit crazy, to get creative. And then the third thing there is take a little bit of time and go around and look at some other webcomics websites. Take a look at what Dave's doing with Drive. Take a look at what I'm doing on Evil Ink. Take a look at what the War and Peace website is like. Take a look at a bunch of these other people who have websites set up. See how they're presenting it. See what their priorities are. Right. Yes. And take a look, do a deep dive. Don't just look at the main page. Click on some of those links. Take a look at where they put their menus are and why and what's on them. And if you're being smart about it, take notes. Yes. Take notes. Yeah. You're going to get you're going to see a bunch of stuff that you're going to say, I don't want to do that. Or you're going to see some things and you're like, oh, I like that. And I could do it even better by doing this or that. Or you'll just see some ideas that you're like, oh, I'm just stealing that entirely. That's a great idea, right? Yeah, yeah. So you, aside from the little starter kit that we just gave you verbally, now it's your turn. Now you have to take an interest in your business. You have to take an interest in whether you succeed or fail in this prospect. Now you have to do the research and see how you can apply all of this to your own website. That's the challenge for you, is that now we can give you the basics here, but now you really have to take that, and it's an opportunity, quite frankly. Take it and run with it.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on Comic Lab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
Dave, I'm thrilled to share with you that once again, the show is being hosted by our good friends at DreamHost. If you go over to dreamhost.com/comiclab, you'll see that they've got a couple of introductory offers for people who are also interested, like we said in the first part of the show, in owning and controlling their own work by starting a website. If you go over there right now, you'll see they've got a couple of great plans. One of them starts at $2.59 a month. The other one starts at $3.95 cents a month. They've got all kinds of great features and add-ons that you can do. And if you're thinking about getting your business started by owning and controlling your own work, DreamHost, they're the people that are ready to get you started. If you're going to dip a toe, this is the time to do it. And these are the folks to do it with.
Well, and I got to tell you, and this is hand to God, I did it myself. Brad and I have been talking about DreamHost for the better part of, I don't know, 3 years, 4 years. Yeah. And this past week, Brad, I pulled the trigger as well over at dreamhost.com/Comic Lab. I got the old credit card out. It's not up yet. As of recording this show, I have a new Sheldon website, the first one in a decade. That now has the Patreon API incorporated that we talked about, like Brad has very wisely guided me towards. And I'm setting it up. It's currently sandboxing at DreamHost. I'm probably going to launch in the next 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. And I love it, Brad. Yes. I love it. Yes. And this is the honest to God, I liked it so much I bought the company kind of a moment because in setting up, okay, so you know how as with any sort of host, you can click a bunch of options, right? And it sort of starts to auto-populate what that server space can do. Right. 25 years been operating online. I did it wrong in setting it up within the first 5 minutes. I did it wrong. So here's one of the things that Brad's been talking about. I reached out to DreamHost customer support. I got a human being on the other line. We talked about it. I explained what I did wrong, that I had, here are my aspirations for the site. Here's what I'm trying to set up. Here's what I clicked wrong. They said, I got it. I'll stay on with you. We're going to get this fixed for you right now. They did. Yeah. Brad, I'm not going to say where I came from in terms of previous hosting, but it rhymes with Schmamazon. And I would not have gotten this level of customer service. It would not have gotten resolved for at least 2 or 3 days. And I would have been frustrated the whole time by trying to read weird tech support back-end Schmamazon things. And it did not happen. I'm going to tell you. So right out the gate, it's not launched yet, but I'm now on DreamHost as well, and I love it so far. Legitimately, their customer service was great in setting me right with my first stumble right out of the gate.
Yeah, and that's why we're happy and proud to be able to endorse these folks. If you're looking at setting up a website, we can, with a clean conscience, say check out dreamhost.com/Comic Lab and see if this is right for you too. And like we both have been saying all along, if you do get into trouble, they got your back.
Yeah. And honest to God, it's not just a clean conscience, it's an excited conscience. I'm legitimately excited to start the new Sheldon website in the next 2 or 3 weeks on dreamhost.com/Comic Lab. So do go check them out.
So Dave, it's time for updates. What do you have for us this week?
Well, this one comes in from the world of Adobe. And for those of you that have Creative Cloud, I just wanted to point out that Adobe has launched Adobe Photoshop Beta. And the reason it's in beta is they are incorporating AI into Photoshop, generative AI into Photoshop. And some of the best examples that I have seen have been professional photographers who will take a photo. Let's say it's a 5:7 photograph ratio, right? Yeah. And they'll widen out the canvas size to maybe 8:10. And then they'll select the inverse of the negative space, and they'll tell Photoshop to generatively fill the rest of that photo. What would take us past the 5:7 ratio and fill it with generative AI. And I have to say, with photographs, it's been doing some incredible work that I've seen online with different representations of it. So I downloaded it on Creative Cloud. I now have Photoshop, and I have Photoshop Beta installed on my computer, and I tried it out. And the update for this week is I installed it, I tried it out multiple ways with my line art and with my colored line art to see what it could do. And my continuing feeling about generative AI is I'm terrified. In broad picture, I'm terrified of it, right? And a little bit downcast about what it can do. But in the short term, I just got to tell you as an update to maybe save yourself a little time, it still looks terrible with all of my own line art in terms of what it can generate. Like that is a skill that generative AI hasn't mastered yet, is line art. Right. And it's very good at photographs because it has way more of a sample set. The line art still comes out really wonky for what I would like to be able to do, which is, let's say, Brad, you're drawing an evil ink and it's a close crop of a mismatch and she's flying through skyscrapers. Wouldn't it be fun for a cover if you want to take that single panel at 300 DPI and say, now make it an 8x10 cover or something, something like that.
Yeah.
And all the buildings, maybe a couple extra line art explosions could be behind her, and bada bing, bada boom. You might still have to draw over it, but wouldn't it be neat if it could do that? And so far, it doesn't yet seem to have the skill set yet. And I say that with the caveat that with photographs, it seems to be doing amazing work. Not so much with line art. So that is my update for this week on Photoshop Beta.
So now, did you have to upload a bunch of your line art so that it kind of knew how you drew?
Well, it cannot yet accept the full body of your work. So, for example, if I had a way of ensuring that Photoshop would not be teaching their overall cloud my drive style, if I had a way of saying, like, I want to use my entire body of work, so here's 3,000 pieces of drive art, but you are not allowed to learn it or share it or put it on a cloud. That to me would be an ideal world where I could say, like, give me 40 versions of this characters from different angles. I just want to see what would be a cool angle for this character in this moment, right? I can see a lot of use for that. And then I would draw over it or just take it as inspiration. Yeah. It can't yet do that. What it does do is in my case, I had a high-res TIFF that was layered. It made me flatten it and RGB it before it could do anything with that image. Does that make sense? It couldn't take the layers, and it couldn't take it in CYMK. I had to bring it into RGB. Basically, I had to make it a fancy JPEG, and then it could do stuff with it. But even then, the color schemes were wrong. The line art was really wrong. It's just not. I just keep going back to that. It's not great at line art yet.
Yeah, but still, it's a good thing to keep an eye on because, like we keep saying, neither one of us is exactly pro artificial intelligence, but it's something that we're going to have to keep our eye on as this thing moves forward, right?
Yeah, and in an alternate world where government had better control on it and they don't. And literally every week now, the leaders of AI keep coming out and being like, hey guys, we really need you to regulate us because we're in capitalist competition and we're not doing it ourselves. And this thing is getting really smart and you really should regulate it. And no one's regulating it yet. I keep getting increasingly anxious about that. But in a world where it was well regulated and we had the ability to control what we uploaded to the cloud so that it wasn't being shared or used in an overall data set, I would actually be pro AI. I would love to use it to give me like 40 versions of how I could draw a scene. And then I could use my selective editor. And then on top of that, my own creativity and draw the scene as I would see it using this spark of inspiration from a bunch of AI generated images. I think that would be lovely. I would welcome that alternate Earth. That's not the alternate Earth we live in. We live in a world where there is no regulation and they're using all of our data sets. And so I'm much colder on the whole idea.
Absolutely. So now it's time to go back to our Patreon questions. This one coming in from Jaren75, who says, is speaking about specifically about an Evolink storyline. The question says, in a recent Evolink storyline, you have scenes taking place in a royal palace, and I'm curious about the process you used to create the backgrounds for these. Did you do some research to find actual reference, or did you access some image banks in Clip Studio and or Photoshop? Did you make 3D visuals for reference the way you did for the Evolink office space? Basically talk about the process. So
I'm excited. Again, I want to say this first as a friend before you launch into this answer, Brad. I don't know how many years ago, maybe 8 or 10 years ago, you really leveled up with your backgrounds. Do I have that timeline right? First of all, by the way, would you say it's about 8 or 10 years ago?
About the same time I started, well, it was after using Clip Studio for a little while, and I got my sea legs with Clip Studio. Then I started experimenting, and I definitely upped my game.
And what it did is, in a transition that Brad was also making, where it went from being purely comedic, installment-based, almost comic strip-y storytelling, to longer stories with arcs and with satisfying moments of highs and lows, not just comedic, right? Having those more in-depth and detailed backgrounds, I thought, really leveled up the whole thing. So I just want to put this sort of, larger picture image on it before you give that specific answer that you're going to give.
Well, and it all kind of has the same answer, and that was that I started using Clip Studio's 3D models at first for anatomy. I set up some male and female models at different body types and so forth, and got them to the proportions that I use for my characters, and then started using them to help keep myself on model, to keep the poses looking natural and so forth. And so once I had done that for a little while, I started incorporating the 3D backgrounds. And there's a number of backgrounds that you can download through Clip Studio. Some of them are free, some of them cost, but they're not really super expensive. But you can take those and then modify them a little bit if you want to. And I started, once I did that, then I could do an illustration of that scene, get everything just the way I wanted it, and then drop those bodies out. And using just a simple tool in Clip Studio, I converted the 3D background into line art. And it's one of those things that you've got to work with it a little bit. You got to tinker with it to make sure that it's coming out the way you want it. And there was a learning curve there, but I finally got to the point where I could get some really great backgrounds just by using those 3D models. And of course, you know what I've said on the show before, life is too short to draw backgrounds, right? I could not have done these scenes with that level of detail as a one-person operation. I just couldn't have done it, right? By drawing those over and over and over again. And I couldn't have kept that consistency. I couldn't have kept the level of quality. So once I started doing that, I started really seeing the potential for using those 3D models as part of my drawing process.
And, Brad and I often talk about the fact that comics, when you do it not just once or twice, but are doing it consistently year over year over year, you recognize that comics is also the art of the possible, in the sense that Brad could spend his whole day drawing backgrounds. Brad could spend, his nights and weekends really poring over doing a bunch of extra detailed work. But one of the lessons that manga has given us in terms of being one of the most crushing deadlines, I think, in the world of comics, for how many pages they have to turn out on a weekly basis for continuing stories, is that CSP and a lot of other, back in the day when Brad and I were coming up, there were whole books of manga pre-printed sort of background speed lines, all the stuff that you could lift. And all of that grew out of the fact that they needed to be able to produce work quickly. And ultimately, as a storyteller, there's sort of a balancing act, isn't there, Brad, about yes, I could spend 40 more hours working on these backgrounds, or I could spend 40 minutes fiddling with this preset background, change the line art to a way that worked with my existing line art style, doesn't overpower it, is a nice little, amuse-bouche in the background of detailed work, and gets you where you need to go basically in minutes rather than hours and hours and hours.
And if you're a younger cartoonist or even an older cartoonist who hears that and says, well, that's cheating, I've got some really bad news for you. This has always been a part of comics, going all the way back to the beginning. Let me tell you something about
Vermeer. It's been a part of painting for centuries. Everybody cheats a little bit in the sense that it's getting where you need to go without ruining your life to get there as an artist.
Yeah. And people have taken that technology along the way. There was a lot of people who took and adjusted the settings on a photocopier to give them something that came close to line art.
Or Lucindagraphs in the 50s and 60s. Yeah, exactly.
And they did instead, they used what they had as tools to make that work as good as it could be and still meet their deadlines.
Or even like in the European tradition with Danton, there's whole books that show the exact reference art that he took to draw a submarine and literally traced over it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because everybody is trying to do the best they can to tell the best story they can with the tools they have available, and more importantly, the time they have available, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what Brad has done. He's found a way to balance out with the time he has available this tool that he can use to incorporate into his art. And sometimes you see it done too quickly. Like sometimes with manga, it's a little too hack. if someone's younger or really trying to go fast, because you'll see like the same scene being reused in book 1, book 4, book 6, or or on page 22 and page 48. They're just not artful enough to hide it. Who was it? Didn't Picasso have a quote that said like a good artist steals, but a great artist steals in a way that hides it or something? There's a quote like that.
You never know when you're being stolen from by a real artist.
But the idea being here in this regard is that a more artful way of doing something like this is to hide it with adding an extra tree or a new building or a slightly different camera angle, or the lighting style is different, and so the reader's eye is never caught in an attentive way that makes them go, wait a minute, I saw this exact same scene 6 pages ago,
Yeah. And the bottom line there is to do something that looks great when you're done with it, right? Because what I want to caution you against is like, oh yeah, Brad's saying that I can take a photo of my living room and use that for my background. Well, yeah, you could, but here's the thing. Does that look good? Is that aesthetic a good aesthetic? I'm going to say maybe 9 chances out of 10, it's not a great aesthetic for most people's work. There might be a case where it's forgivable here or there, but 9 chances out of 10, it's not a real good aesthetic, especially if your foreground is line art and then the background is a photo. It doesn't look great, right? But the idea is to find where you can get that image to consistently look good and also save you time. And in my case, increase accuracy and so on and so forth. And here's where it's led me. A couple of things. Number one, you can actually hire people who are 3D artists, like who use Blender and so forth. You can hire them and say, hey, build me this set, right? And say, here's like an office that I want. And I want you to build, here's the specs and everything. Here's what I want. Then you've got that for the rest of your cartooning. You've got that office. It's always going to be consistent. The desks are always going to be in the same place. You can move them around and so forth. And you can hire somebody to do those 3D backgrounds for you that make your work even more fast. And also the second thing I found, every now and again, I have an atmosphere or an environment that doesn't exist. Right. Or I don't find it in the CSP libraries. I don't want to hire somebody to do it because it's maybe just a one-time thing. They've got things called primitives in CSP. And it's exactly what you're thinking. It's a cone, a cylinder, a cube, a plane. And so the last few commissions I've done, I had this image in my mind of here's what's going on. And I literally just built it using these primitives. And then once I had everything set up, I drew over it like the cylinder might have. It didn't end up looking like a cylinder. I drew cut-ins and based the image off of that organically. But the main points of perspective, the main points of keeping that, if I did it in a subsequent
I see what you mean.
Illustration, I could turn the camera and everything would be the same. As I've gotten better and better at manipulating the 3D backgrounds, I've also gotten better to creating things on my own, which, by the way, brings us all the way full circle. I'm back to creating things on my own that maybe don't exist in real life, and say, okay, now that's going to be this space, and then I use that. So it's been a real kind of holistic way of keeping myself on model, keeping the images looking great, getting wonderful looking scenes, and also upping my game as an illustrator as well.
And so I want to jump in here because I can hear already people who come from maybe more of an art background rather than a writing background in cartooning, or for whom their artwork is an incredible mark of pride. And I can hear them saying to us, Brad and Dave, this is way too hacky, this approach of like using pre-built things or photo reference or this or that. I want my art to be coming out of my pen and whole cloth and ready to go. And so first of all, I have 3 responses to this. First of all, the first one is go with God. Of course, if you value your art and you want to do it this way, absolutely. Brad and I value that and celebrate that, and we cheer you on as you want to create every aspect of your work whole cloth without any reference or without any modeling or without any 3D modeling or AI or without photo reference. Honestly, God, go with God. That's great. That is great. There's nothing that any artist would ever say to you that would be denigrating about that, right? That's number one.
Walk your path.
Number two is Brad and I are now around year 25 on our career drawing wise, right? And I just want to tell you as a friend, I could, without even scratching the surface hard, I could point out 5 or 6 artists who had the exact same attitude that you had, but are not drawing anymore because and I'm not saying this in a mean way. It does take its toll after a decade of artists who either their hand stops working or their shoulder gets cramps or their life balance wasn't good anymore. Their relationships were suffering because they were drawing all the time, right? What I'm saying is the comics are the art of the possible. And in many respects, you can still tell just as compelling, just as wonderful, just as engaging, just as eye-catching a story by using what are some helpful tools and tricks that Brad is suggesting here. And I don't think they knock down your art in a way that you might be feeling in your heart of hearts right now, right? Like you might be saying to yourself, this feels too much like a cheat. And I'm saying, that's fine. I honor that. But I can tell you over my 25 years, there's a lot of people that I know that aren't drawing anymore, that aren't creating anymore, that felt that way. And by God, they tripled down on it and it beat them up over both physically, emotionally, in their relationships and in their time use. So that's just number two. Number three is, and this is kind of hard for all cartoonists to recognize, is that sometimes we have to just pause to acknowledge that when the eye is darting down from word balloons down to the art, next panel, word balloons down to the art, the eye and the mind might be giving your panels less of a thorough inspection than you think that the eye is giving it, right?
Yes.
Comics are read, and I say that intentionally. They are read first. And then the artwork jumps in. And yes, we all love eye-catching, amazing art, and we all comment on it, and they win Eisners. But what I'm saying is some of the most amazing, compelling stories that you have read in comics, if you look at individual panels or individual executions, sometimes it's not so amazing an individual. Like you're not looking at a Dali painting on certain panels of My Hero Academia or on X-Men or on this, or it doesn't matter what the story I could pick is, because they were doing the art of the possible and they were making it on deadline and they were trying to get it out. And that's true with graphic novels as well. It's true with comic strips. It's true with everything. So what I'm saying is the third point is that sometimes we just have to acknowledge that for our audience, the artwork is, I don't know how to better say it than the way I did it. It is less of an impact than we think it has on an individual basis. Taken cumulatively, it has a huge impact. But sometimes these little cheats and tricks and tools that we use along the way are enough to get the story going and keep it going. Because remember, the best thing you can do is finish the story, get it out there, right? Right. And so, yes, you could spend decades working on this next panel or this splash page or this background. Sure. Yeah. The better thing is that it's out in the world and it's being told as a story. And
I'll give you number 4, and it's going to hurt to hear, but if you listen to me, you'll know it's true. Your readers don't care. Your readers do not care that you used photo reference for that background. Your readers don't care that you did an auto convert from a 3D background to line art. Your readers don't care. Your readers want a good reading experience. And think about this. Let's take the technology back a little bit. Could you imagine how dumb it would be if someone said, well, yeah, he drew that straight line, but he used a T-square. Yeah, so it's not that great when you think about it. No, nobody in the history of comics never said that, right? They didn't say, good straight line, but I bet he used a T-square. They just said that was a great perspective shot. That was a great, whatever they're talking about. Your readers don't care that you drew this by hand. They just care that it's beautiful and that it meant something and that it was a meaningful, significant moment for them. That's what they care about. They really don't care about how the sausage is made, by and large. There might be a couple who are out there, that's not good and I don't like it. That's fine. And by the way, that's a reader you can do without. Then remember, there's infinite readers out there. You don't need to cling to that one that's not doing you any good. By and large, readers don't care. They're just there for the experience. They really don't care how it happened. They are in the moment. And that's something you got to consider as well, is why are you knocking yourself out? Remember that Wally Wood quote? We bring it up here from time to time. I'm not going to get it exact perfect because I didn't plan for it, but it was pretty much, don't copy something you can trace. Don't trace something you can Photoshop. Don't Photoshop something that you can paste in.
Yeah, I guess.
Photoshop is working in the 70s, so it wasn't Photoshop, but you understand.
That, yeah.
He's like, listen, this is what the game is. The game, especially for as long as there's been comics, it's been a commodity. And it's been a regularly updated commodity. If not a daily comic strip, it was a monthly comic book, right? This has been commodity. And this has been a natural part of the drawing process since the very, very beginning. Okay, yeah. So I wouldn't feel bad about using a 3D background that I auto convert into line art any more than I feel bad about using digital typography, using a font.
Right.
I'm not hand lettering my comic either. You know why? It would take me too much time and it would look terrible. I don't feel any worse about the 3D backgrounds than I feel about a digital font.
Absolutely, because ultimately we are communicating. We're trying to communicate a message. Is it a joke? Is it a story? Is it a character arc? Is it a graphic novel? We're trying to communicate. And so whether or not Tintin uses a photo reference of a sub, or Bloom County has a photostat reference of Caspar Weinberger in a frame photo in the background, or Brad Geiger has a 3D image of a background city in the background of Evil Inc., or someone's using digital lettering, for example, or you get where I'm going with this. The idea was they communicated, they touched their audience, they told a story, they transmitted a message, they made that audience feel something. And that's what you're ultimately trying to do. And so, yes, you can absolutely die on the altar of sacrificing for constant art and your hand cramps and you're not, in your relationships because you're in the studio 70 hours a week. Absolutely, you can do that. No one will say nay to that, right? Yes. But what we're saying is there is nothing wrong emotionally with using the tools you have to get more stories out, better stories out, more frequent and consistent stories out by using the tools that are available to you in the cartooning world.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it any better myself, Dave. Your audience has to feel something, right? And right now, our audience is feeling like it's been about an hour and they're getting tired of hearing us for all this time. So we got to bring this show to an end. That means I get to say you've been listening to Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my wonderful friend, Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evilcomic.com.
And my on-the-mend friend, Dave Kellett, the co-director of the comics documentary Stripped, and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com, and Drive at drivecomic.com.
On-the-mend friend is very cute.
I did that on the spot.
I got to tell you, I immediately saw a children's book where it's two stuffed bears and one bear had his leg like it needs to be sewn back together, you know? And it's just called On the Mend Friend. That's you got to hold on to that for something. That's a cute title. Anyway, the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love Comic Lab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode. And don't forget to give us a 5-star review on Spotify, where we are burning up those podcast charts.
And honestly, we don't push that very often, but it really does help when you go ahead and give a high rating over an Apple iTunes podcast, or over on Spotify. So do take a second if you're pausing at work and you're on your phone, or if you're on a train, or if you're on a bus, or if you're working in your studio, just take a hot second and give us a good rating, and boy, it does help the show get out there. Really and I will say Comic Lab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/Comic Lab. So we'll go ahead and say that twice. Patreon.com/look for Brad's new book, On the Mend Friends, coming out this fall from Scholastic. So, Brad, can I tell you the animals that I saw in Alaska?
Oh, yeah.
Because it's bonkers cool how they literally are right there, too. It's so cool to just be near wild animals like that, just outside. So we were just outside of Juneau, Alaska by Mendenhall Glacier, which unfortunately, Brad, is receding a lot. I don't want to alarm anybody. Apparently, there might be some environmental changes that we're causing on our planet. Anyway,
I wonder.
The glacier's a little. But okay, so the coolest animal I saw that I had not seen previously. This time, I saw a bear in Alaska. That was fun.
From a distance, I hope.
Thank God, from a distance and from inside of a car. So that was good. I saw a billion ravens, and God, they are smart, and God, they are adventurous. They will come right up to you, to the point where one was on a picnic table, and I was trying to get something out of my backpack, and I put my back to the side, and I go to the other side of the picnic table to like sort the stuff out. I go back, and there's a raven on top of my backpack, right? And he's about the size of my backpack. And I go, hey, and he looks at me and he goes, ah, and I go, hey, and he goes, ah. So I'm like, get off my backpack. And he goes, ah. I was like, geez Louise. But they are
It sounds like you got into an argument with a raven.
I'm not at all kidding. He was absolutely communicating with me. Like I smell that there's food in this backpack and I'm not getting off. But his beak was like 5 or 6 inches long. His claws were gigantic. Like when you get really close to a raven, not a crow, they are kind of murder birds in terms of what they have on them, you know? So I kind of waved a stick around and got rid of them. But so I saw a couple of, what's our national bird? I'm blanking on the name.
American eagle.
No, not the American eagle. The bald eagle, not the American eagle, the bald eagle. Wait, is it called the American eagle? No, it's not.
I did that. No, you're right. It's a bald eagle.
Oh my God! Did we both have a stroke? I couldn't remember it, and you called it the wrong thing.
Bird. I just thought American eagle.
I saw a couple of bald eagles. God, that's an impressive bird. I'm so glad we went with that rather than the turkey.
Good choice.
And then I saw some fish. That was fun. I don't know why that sounded exciting, but it was fun for me. I got to see fish. And,
I saw some fish. Thank you, Mrs. Paul.
Yeah, exactly. But, you know, in general, though, if and I'm saying this to our wider audience, if you ever get the chance to go up to Alaska, it's one of the best purchases we ever made from Russia. What a great place to go, Brad. It is. I got to tell you, the Tsar blew it in selling us Russia. Yeah. It's a great purchase. I'm a big fan. That and the Louisiana purchase, I'm going to tell you, two of my favorite purchases. We did good.
Two of the best purchases.